Let me welcome to the show. She is committed, and I love this book. It is called Birth of a White Nation, The Invention of White People and Its Relevance Today. She's a critical race educator. Let me welcome to the show for the first time, Dr. Jacqueline Battalora. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Oh, thank you for coming through. Born in Edinburgh, Scotland. You ended up in Texas. Sorry about that.
It was a shock.
I'm sure a culture shock. Growing up in a space like Scotland, which is relatively homogenous, I would say, right? There's not a whole lot of other people there. What did you learn about race coming to America?
I didn't live in Scotland long enough, but I did live in Antwerp, Belgium till the age of 9. And so a similar situation, it is not the case that virtually everyone is white in either of those spaces, really, but my world was white. I went to church where everyone was white. I lived in a neighborhood where everyone was white. I did go to an international school, and that was the one space where there were people from Africa there as well. So, but for the most part, it was a very white environment. And then, but we would spend summers here in Chicago where my mom's parents lived. And so I learned in just those little brief visits over summer, I learned a whole lot about what it means to be white, what it means to be not white, and most particularly what it means to be Black.
What did you learn?
Well, one of my earliest memories, and I want to be very clear, like I love my grandparents, and they're not all bad people, but they definitely
can we before we get into this, because I don't believe anybody thinks of themselves. There's a handful. I think maybe 1% of the people that wear Klan hoods and Nazi masks and all that, like, actually are committed to this. The rest of the people are just, they're grafted into a system that they don't even understand because it's not taught, it's not explained. So it's not like you're a bad person because you have these feelings and thoughts. Hell, I'm sure those people those Africans that you went to school with had opinions about Black people, because I'm sure socioeconomically speaking, y'all are all in the same, like there was a wealth thing there. So you're all the same, even though these people have Black skin, you still are operating in the same power structure. So yes, your grandparents are probably lovely people.
To most people, I don't think I would subject my Black friends, and so it's complex, and absolutely it's the result of the society they were born into. But so we'd have these moments driving through downtown Chicago, and one of my earliest memories of seeing a person who was African American was on one of these drives, and then hearing my grandfather, who was a trucker with the Teamsters, and so he used this derogatory term to refer to these people. And I didn't know the term, but I definitely got the message that these people were not welcome by him, that they were to be feared in some way, and were a drawback to the city of Chicago. So in just those little moments of information, I really learned a whole lot.
And moving forward, right? Because you have devoted a great deal of your career to this anti-race movement. Writing this book in particular, what was the impetus for doing this? And being committed, because I'm sure a lot of people are raised in households where they hear their parents or grandparents use the N-word or derogatory, and they don't go out and crusade to fight racism.
Sure. Well, when I moved to Texas, I was kind of a tomboy. I loved sports. And one of the only sports that there were for girls was basketball. And it was serious business at Victoria High School. And so I had close friendships with Black girls and Black boys. We played basketball all the time. And so when you are close to people, when you have genuine connections with people, then it flies in the face of those messages that I heard from my grandparents, for example, my grandfather specifically. And so I think that was the impetus. I think that put a seed inside my heart. And then I had this moment of falling in love. The first person I fell in love with, Ricky Brigham, African-American boy, Victoria, Texas. And so I learned very quickly that being white wasn't about the color, what you looked like, that it was this, I didn't, of course, have these words at that time, but it was through that I began to see that white was something that could be taken away. You could be deprived of the stuff that was assigned to whiteness if you violated its rules. I began to get
wait. So falling in love with this boy put you on the outskirts of whiteness?
In certain ways, absolutely. So let me give you some examples. So I had friends, white friends, who were no longer allowed to see me, to socialize.
So you were publicly like holding this boy's hand. You were out with this young man. You were.
Yeah.
Okay. And
yes.
their parents said, you can't play with Jacqueline anymore. You can't be.
Some of my friends' parents wouldn't allow them to hang out. You know, we were in high school. You don't really play anymore, but so we couldn't hang out anymore. And even like I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and my older siblings who were in college or out of college were got blowback as well. So in these ways, I got these messages about, like, I didn't know. I knew that I was a person called white. I had no idea what it meant until living through that. And of course, it gave me a much closer view of the daily insults that Ricky had to endure as a Black man in Victoria, Texas. Even now, you know, like we have a raising funds for a reunion, and he's one of the first ones to volunteer to step up. And then some white male has to come in and take charge of the money, because you can't have a Black man in charge of money. Yeah. So, I mean, he like so many Black men and women, I don't have to tell you, have to endure these just daily indignities that I didn't know.
So, Dr. Jacqueline Battalora, you then started to study it? Like, what led you to the study of?
Yeah. Well, I was doing research in graduate school at Northwestern on legal prohibitions in marriage. And I was doing this research in the law library and going back and back and back in time. And somewhere in the 1600s, when I was reading through Virginia colonial law, something weird happened. And I didn't know what it was, but it just kept eating at me. And then a few days later, I kept going back to the library and continuing the research. And a few days later, I woke up at like 2 a.m. and I was like, oh my gosh, that's it. White people had vanished. And so for the first 100 years of the English attempting to colonize in North America, if you read all their laws for the first 100 years, you will not see a single person called a white person. It's only in 1681 when we see for the very first time anyone in these English laws referred to as a white person. And there's a reason for it. It came about following this massive rebellion. And up until this time, those from Africa and from England who worked on the same plantation, they were treated the same. They worked together, they ate together, they slept together, they married regularly. There were free people of African descent. Free Black men could run for public office. I found 3 in Virginia who did and held public office. They could own, free Black men could own European indentured servants and indentured servants of African descent, and a few even claimed some as indentured for life or enslaved. And so that was life up and through this massive rebellion called Bacon's Rebellion. And Bacon's Rebellion scared the English ruling elite. It lasted well over a year. They burned Richmond to the ground. They slaughtered the indigenous people surrounding the colony. That was sort of the first phase of the rebellion, but the second phase focused on the ruling elite. And they actually, the ruling elite in Virginia fled onto a ship in the river, in the James River, where they stayed for months until the English sent in troops and quashed the rebellion. And the rebellion consisted of people from Africa and from Europe side by side, wielding rebellion against the ruling elite. So when that rebellion was finally quashed, was finally put down, the ruling elite in Virginia said to the legal oversight authority over in London, they said, don't worry, we have this under control. And they indicated that their plan was to pursue a divide and conquer strategy.
Oh, pause for a second, because as anyone, please go down the rabbit hole, Bacon's Rebellion. But you think about Nathaniel Bacon as like Fred Hampton, who understood the power of bringing all folk together. So there was an alliance between the mostly Irish, European indentured servants, the Africans who were enslaved from that 1619 to 20 some odd Negroes, that became a thing. There were also indentured Africans and other Blacks, right? And different classes. It was a way of bringing everybody together. Right. And he died from dysentery. So I'm not sure, like they didn't kill him. No.
He had injuries and then got dysentery. Yeah.
So you think about somebody that understood we're all in this together. And then
I don't know that he did, to be honest.
Okay, talk about
because what he was so mad about, what sort of ignited his fuse, was that he believed that 3 of his neighbors' indentured servants were murdered by indigenous people. And so he was furious with Governor Berkeley that Governor Berkeley didn't respond violently against the Native Americans. But of course, the ruling elite had all these special deals with Native Americans, and so they didn't want to mess that up. They gave them an exclusive fur trade. It made them richer. And so that's why the first phase of the rebellion was an absolute slaughter of Native American people. So it's
you're saying it was strategy that this European guy, Nathaniel Bacon, brought all these other people together because of strength in numbers, which is still a good strategy.
Well, and let me tell you something. He didn't have to look far to find a bunch of disgruntled people, because right at this, up until the 1660s, there were boatloads of just desperate people from England who were living on the streets. It was illegal to be poor. They would get swept up off the streets and put in workhouses where they would literally work till their death. And so another option was to come as an indentured servant to North America, where at least you had a possibility of something else. And so somewhere in the 1660s, that supply of labor ended. And so conditions began to get pretty bad for people in the English colonies of Virginia and Maryland, because plantation owners were desperate to hold on to the labor that they had. So they began to pass all of these laws that imposed really harsh punishments for relatively minor infractions. Again, they were just trying to hold on to the labor they had because they knew they couldn't fill the gaps in their labor supply.
I'm reading Black AF history, the unwhitewashed story of America, Michael Harriot's new book that comes out in September. And he pretty much unravels the thread of the lies of how this country was founded by people who couldn't survive, couldn't figure things out. But apparently they did have a superpower in strategy and manipulation and might, gunpowder being one of them. So the message went back to Europe. We got this. We got an idea. What was the big idea?
Divide and conquer. It worked. They knew that would work. And let me give credit to Theodore Allen, because his work is really, I drew on it heavily. And his research is the research that exposed this intent once they put down Bacon's Rebellion, that the way in which they were going to make sure that rebellion or anything like it never happens again is this divide and conquer strategy. And so if you look at the laws, what we see in the decades after Bacon's Rebellion are these bundles and bundles of laws getting passed in Maryland and Virginia, because those two places shared an economy rooted in tobacco farming, a dramatic sex imbalance. There were roughly 12 men for every woman. And they had that economic need for a replenishment of labor. And so these bundles of laws began to strip especially free Black people, who up until this point experienced all of the rights and privileges of a free European man. The same rights and privileges by law. Okay, so like most of us have to take a moment to let that sink in, because it's so contrary to anything we've ever known. And so here's some of the first laws that were passed. There was a law passed that now punished and rendered illegal those who married for I'm going to use the language of Black and white. They used white and they used Negro in the law. So a law prohibited now white people from marrying Black people and Native Americans. A law was passed that prohibited free Black men from running for public office. It blocked them from voting. It prohibited them from testifying against a white person. And it also prohibited them from being in possession of gun or powder. And there were many, many more. They just keep passing these bundles of laws. And what I think is so important for us in this moment in time is to remember that up until this point, free people of African descent and free people of European descent had the same rights and privileges according to their class. The same. And of course, with this invention of white people asserted through privileges in law, and let's just take one, right? Because up until this point, nobody was referred to as a white person in law, no one. And so you start to see through these laws that strip rights away from people of African descent, the assertion of this new group of humanity called white people. And let's just take one of those laws, the law that now prohibited Black people from testifying against white people. What did white people learn about what it means to be white from just that one law? Right?
That I could do anything I want to a Black person, and there's no recourse, and there's no.
Who fears prosecution?
Yes.
Yeah, unless another white person's going to testify against me.
Right.
Yeah.
And how would what would that be? Yes.
Unlikely, right? And then what did Black people learn, right? Because remember, up until this point, you had the same rights, responsibilities, just according to your class. So they learned, you better be passive and submissive to this new group of people called white people, or else.
So this is 1600s before America's a nation.
That's
so
right.
How are laws codified and made in this new world? Like if Black people are also participating in places like Virginia, like how are these laws? Is it like Texas today? What is happening?
Well, you have the House of Burgess. It's the English system, that how they set up governments in their colonies. And, the King Charles at the time definitely orchestrated who was
ironic. Wait, pause. So it was a King Charles then.
Indeed.
Wow.
Indeed.
Continue. I'm sorry, Dr. Jacqueline.
No, you're good. I wanted to raise one other point about just that one law that prohibited Black people from testifying against white people. It not only sent those messages, first of all, it's one of the first laws, right, that worked to radically reorganize colonial society. And it also reveals that the law itself, the legal system itself, represents the interests and perspectives of this new group of people called white. And it doesn't say it's for white people, but from that assertion in law, it makes it clear that that's the function of the legal system itself.
That's
and
so
those
powerful.
Laws that prohibited Black people from testifying, I know that they worked for their intended purposes because you see them throughout U.S. history. After the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, when the United States, Mexico was chopped in half and the United States grew from Texas over to California, you began to see laws passed in those regions, California through a court decision that said Mexicans cannot testify against white people. after 1848, when you had large numbers of Chinese men come to build the most dangerous sections of our railroad, what did we see again?
Chinese
Laws
Exclusion
passed,
Acts. Yeah.
and laws passed that prohibit Chinese people, the language was mongrel in the laws, from testifying against white people. So that law worked. And how did it work? Well, it worked to keep these groups of people constructed as not white, cheap and dependent labor. And they function to help this group, even if they're really poor and don't have lots of resources, but they're called white, at least you're above them.
We are with Dr. Jacqueline Battalora. Her book is Birth of a White Nation, The Invention of White People and Its Relevance Today. She traced back all the way to the 1600s when they first instituted whiteness into the law. And here we are, more than 500 years, almost 500 years later, still debating this thing. Thank you for doing the book. So where are we now? And just personally, I'm going to ask, you didn't end up marrying Ricky, right? I'm imagining you went the traditional route.
I went off to college and he went off and started his businesses in Austin, and we're still the best of friends.
Okay. But yeah. Do you live a relatively homogenous life now? Because I feel like there's a lot of folk out there crusading, but it's quite another thing to,
Yeah, well, you know what? I mean, for my white world, no, it's not homogenous. Both of my neighbors on both sides of me are African American. I'm at a school, I work at a university that's predominantly Latinx. So could it be more diverse? Sure.
This is not an indictment. I just, there was a study, 3/4 of people who identify as white self-segregate in this country.
Oh, yeah.
And they willfully, put themselves, so your grandparents, if you have no relationship to people, and we've talked with Tim Wise and Jane Elliott and Robin DiAngelo has been on the show about the willful way in which whiteness maintains itself. And now these laws forcing white people to have babies because there's a dwindling effect, because it's a made up construct, and you're going to lose your population at some point, because it's just, when people start to wake up to it, it's a paper balloon. So how do we navigate where we are right now?
Yeah, well, I think, I'll speak to white people primarily right now, if that's okay. Yes. What we need to do, first of all, there's no place not to begin to engage in this effort of racial justice. We have work to do inside of ourselves. We have work to do in our families, in our communities, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our politics. There is no place there is not a tremendous amount of work to be done. And so people always ask me, well, what do I do? We white people, we like a little, give me 10 things to check off my list, please. And so for me, the most influential route for my growth was learning truthful history. And so that was huge for me. So we need to learn some honest history about this country, and especially white people, because we didn't go into homes or to faith communities that offered us truthful versions of history. Most of us just went to our public school and got that version. And so much of it is not truthful, or it leaves out so much of the truth that it can't be, it lacks a genuineness. So learn truthful history. There are some, if you're not a reader, reading, of course, I think is fabulous. If you're able to engage yourself, there's so many things on CD and available virtually and through all different kinds of resources. So I just think there's no excuse to not engage in learning truthful history. The other thing that we need to do is we need to process. And I know when I was in graduate school and really digging into so much of this history, about the only thing written that I knew of out there in the world was Peggy McIntosh's list of white privileges. Like, that was it. And there were no groups for me to go join and talk about my whiteness and what I'm coming to see for the first time about what it means to be white. But today there are all kinds of support structures to help white people process the history that we all need to learn. There are affinity spaces, virtual and in person. Highly, highly, highly recommend that. If we're just learning all this stuff and not processing it and bringing it literally into our bodies, then it's just going to stay up here. And we will change nothing. I have met so many, especially men, and it's not because men are particularly bad, it's because they're socialized as men, to learn just the intellectual parts of race. But it's more than intellectual. It informs our bodies, like how we respond, how we feel in relation to each other. How
I don't
your
know
body
how. I'm sorry. I don't know how. There's no benefit to a white man dismantling whiteness. There's zero. There's no pain point for them to to not be white. Do you know? There's
I'm
nothing.
challenging you on that. I'm going to challenge you, Karen.
I can't see somebody waking up. Oh, you know what? Let me give up all of this. It's all this law, this to be able to do all of these things and storm the Capitol and not be held accountable, run for president from jail. Like
all of those things are true. And I know this from my own self, that whiteness damages our humanity. It diminishes our capacity to have empathy. Think about how we describe psychopaths. What's a definition of a psychopath?
So you're saying the entire white race?
Well, I'm saying,
I agree with you. Hold on. Yeah. Yes, you are correct. But the reason why you know that is that you had a relationship first in sport, which sport is the greatest equalizer and coming together that you can possibly introduce young people to. It's very hard to be racist when you are a teammate of someone, and then you fell in love with somebody, and you probably got to know the family, whatever, and you're like, all of these stereotypes don't. You had a relationship that impacted your life, and I always say, once you go black, you never go back, because there's something about the culture. If you are a white person, you come in the culture, you can't deny it. The problem, though, Dr. Jacqueline, is that 75% of y'all's cousins refuse to have relationships. So they are ostensibly willful sociopaths.
Yeah. And let me also add a little more nuance to that. So even though the first person I experienced falling in love with was this amazing young Black man, I still, even with that, right? And I'm guessing in my psychology, I carved out an exception. You know, he was my Oprah. He was my Colin Powell, right? Whiteness.
You're Barack Obama.
Yeah, whiteness has said, oh, all the real Black people are that way. And then we have a few exceptions that will sort of fold in. They're okay.
Right. He had to be all of the exceptions. He had to be just handsome and all of the things, right?
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
Absolutely. So even with the depths of those relationships, I still had what I like to refer to as been successfully acculturated in the racial hierarchy, you know, and so this is what happened to me that was a significant moment in my life. I was watching news coverage, and it was talking about the 6 people who'd been killed on the Long Island train, 6 white people. And I sat there and I was upset. I was thinking about children who now had a parent who'd never come home, parents who now had a child. Anyway, I was kind of wrecked for the rest of the day. And then like 3 or 4 days later, I came home, sat on the couch, turned on CNN, and on this day, 4 Black people had been killed, and I got up and made dinner. And while I was prepping dinner and I'm an adult, right? I've already been through law school, undergrad, and now I'm in, I love school, graduate school again. And 2 of my closest friends are people of color, African-American woman, Filipino-American man in graduate school. And I realized for the first time in my life that I didn't have empathy. I wasn't thinking about kids who now had a parent not coming home, about parents who now had a child. I did not have anything. And I thought I was a good person. You know, I had done all the things my good Catholic upbringing taught me to do. I was vegetarian, for God's sake, you know, but But I had to confront a truth in me, which is that I did not have empathy for those Black people, even with all those relationships. Like
So
that's the grip that whiteness has on us. And so let me just say one quick thing about how I know that white men too. What's so hard is getting an in with them. It's so hard. With white women, we can talk about patriarchy and their experience and start making some parallels. And
I don't trust them either. Nope. I think it's even harder with Missy Ann than it is with Uncle Fester. But go ahead,
Oh,
continue.
okay. Well,
I think it's just as hard because you'll empathize over Roe v. Wade, and then 54% of y'all will go vote for Trump. So like it makes no sense. And wear a pussy hat, be outraged, but then next election,
well,
worse.
and when I go to racial justice spaces like the White Privilege Conference that just happened in Mesa, Arizona, a huge percentage of the people who are digging into those really tough conversations, and coming up is the National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Ed in New Orleans. You will see mostly white women who are going into sessions to learn about race and to come to understand it. So is it true? Did 54% of white women vote for Trump? Yeah. And I don't think any probably of the white women in these spaces voted for Trump. And they're the majority of people in these spaces. So again, I just think it's all really complicated. And
So where
I
did
want
you
to call
go?
us in. I want to listen to Loretta Ross, who's like, we got to stop calling each other out, and call each other in. She's one of the most beautiful human beings out there who keeps seeing how we're like pushing each other away, critiquing each other so that we're shamed and wounded. And I'm like, we have got to find a way to like embrace each other and support each other. Like I still today challenge Ricky on his misogyny. He's a successfully acculturated male in this culture, and it's not okay. That misogyny is not okay.
So after you sat down for dinner, and came to the realization that you too, Dr. Jacqueline Battalora, you have no empathy. Where did you go get empathy? What was the next thing you did?
Yeah. Well, the next thing I did was I began to pay attention to when I did have empathy, and I found out I had boatloads for kittens and puppies and polar bears and turtles and etc. So I began to study myself and my culture around me. And it was not too far after that moment when I stumbled upon white people were there and then they weren't there. Learning that history was my understanding of what the hell happened to me. What could do that to me? I knew from the moment of that recognition that I didn't have empathy, that I was not born that way. I knew that something had been done to me. And now I know what it is. Whiteness. Whiteness is what was done to me. I was born into a culture and society organized in a way that gave me message after message after message that white people are to be elevated and people who aren't white to varying degrees are somewhere beneath.
And you're a good Catholic, which to me is an oxymoron, and in the sense that religion has fomented this very notion, probably better than the school system. And as you're talking, we're going back to 1680, the first laws
1681, the first time there's 1681 reference to white.
In addition to codifying whiteness and elevating whiteness, you also demoted blackness to the point where black can never be elevated to white, ever, forever, right? So what you've ostensibly done with this we're going to divide and conquer is you created a group of people who always see themselves above everyone else, and then a group of people fighting for acceptance into a thing, and then a group that can never be accepted. And so what I deal with every day is the fallout of folk who are so traumatized generationally, the epigenetics of having to jump off of curbs and cower yourselves and laugh in a barrel and speak in dulcet tones and not make the power structure nervous and No, don't, two or more gather, don't do that. And so when I show up like this, it's so foreign that I'm a problem. So I'm challenging everyone to be a problem. I don't want to be the only problem. Everybody be a problem.
Yes.
Everyone buck the system. Everyone show up fully. But first you got to know what that even looks like, because 400 years you've been muted. So what does it look like to be a self-actualized, free, determined Black person in the world? Because this thing has gone across the seas. You got Black people bleaching their skins. You got Asian people bleaching their skins. You got folk all over the world identifying the epitome of success with whiteness, white maleness, to be exact, to the point where when I'm in business, and I think I do a damn good job, and I should be CEO of a number of companies because I center human beings. If everyone eats, then we're good. That is so antithetical, but that is the community that I come from. Yeah. I feel like there's work on both sides. Yes, white folk, get your lives, get yourselves together, but I don't even care what you do. I need Black folk to walk into their purpose and power and not center whiteness in anything. How do we do that? I shouldn't ask you. I'm asking the Black folk. I'm talking to Black people right now. What is your role in the job that you're in to break the system? How do you challenge the folk? Because it's inherent bias. It's not that they're evil. Some are evil, but it's inherent, and they're evil. They actually feel entitled to their evil. So they don't identify as evil because they go to church. They're good Christians or Jews or wherever, because it doesn't, to me, matter who you pray to. I had to get that off my chest. I don't know. This work is so frustrating. I'm glad you did the book and the work and the study on yourself and all that, but I don't see a way out of it. And I'm glad you must do it. You, Tim Wise, everybody, we need 100,000 more of you to do this. But then stop putting on pussy hats and going out and crying and coming over and, gather your cousins up at Thanksgiving table. And
Karen, I want to say this because it's so frustrating to me, and I'm not sure how you used it, but I know that people out there, we want white people to cry. Like, I should have been freaking crying that day in front of the TV. Crying is not the problem. What's a problem is when I cry when you challenge me on my racism, and that crying becomes a way to deflect and to everybody to take care of me instead of me confront my racism. But crying is, we need white people to heal ourselves from this damage to our humanity that patriarchy, that white supremacy has inflicted on us, and become fully human again. I know that we can. Look, when you look at some of us who are white people, I'm still white. I still I still enact whiteness in my life, in my relationships. And I've made significant strides despite being white, right? And if in just the amount of time that I've been able to heal so much of the damage to my humanity, like, there is hope. There is, right? You think of Resmaa Menakem and the things that he has done to restore his Black beautiful self in the world, to free himself from this deep-seated historical ancestral harm. There is hope. There's not enough, and I don't know how to put these things on speed. For me, that's one of the questions. But I do know that some of these messages from Loretta Ross, I've mentioned her a couple times, but to me, she's a really important voice. And because I know that one thing that's working against us is shaming people, and people who are taking a toe, right? They're taking a toe in this racial justice work, and we're like, let me call you out the way you said that, and let me get on you, and
because you're there. Which is why I don't want you to even be the center of the focus. I'm glad that you did this work, but every time somebody calls up, it's like, as a white man, and I say, define that. They stop calling, by the way, because how do you define that? You've identified yourself as a white woman. How do you define that? What does that even mean?